Hi, welcome to Living Catholic, the weekly podcast from the Diocese of Birmingham, where we talk about how to live our Catholic life in Christ faithfully and with joy in this year of the parish and the Eucharist. I'm joined today by Ennie Hickman of the Delray Collective. Ennie and his wife, Kana, have been in full-time ministry for over 2 decades. They've worked for churches, mission companies, dioceses, and universities. They've missioned abroad and in their own backyard, on big stages and on intimate porches. As their website says, they've learned some stuff about some stuff. Their current apostolate, the Delray Collective, is about giving formation and encouragement to ordinary missionary disciples to open their homes and their porches and host their own life-giving dinners and gatherings. They believe this has the potential to change the world. Their motto is, love God, love neighbor, gather on a porch. Ennie, welcome to Living Catholic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anders. It's awesome to be here.
Well, we're so glad to have you. You've got a very interesting ministry, but you also have a pretty interesting story. So why don't we start by tell us who you are, how you got to this point, and what it is that you're doing in the Delray Collective.
Well, I would be remiss to not mention kind of where I came from. I was always around ministry stuff. My mom was the typist for our pastor, right? So the weekly bulletins and the weekly pastor letters and all this, she started that. So I grew up a block and a half from my parish. We had perpetual adoration in the chapel since like 1982 or something. And so the parish life and, ministry and being around priests and religious was just sort of part of my upbringing. I knew the language of faith. I knew, I could sort of, repeat and rinse and kind of tell you everything about the Catholic faith as a young child. But I didn't really develop a real relationship or really know what faith alive meant probably until I was around my freshman or sophomore year in college, when I had always been a fan of St. Francis of Assisi and the sort of the leaving of the world. I had gone to University of Texas to pursue a film. I wanted to be in film. And then also, I was also a baseball player. So I was trying to walk on to the Longhorns and film. Neither of those things sort of worked out. I ended up joining a fraternity. It's like, what do you do when your dreams are, join a fraternity. I don't know. That seems the right thing to do. I didn't lose my faith in Jesus, although I probably missed mass, man, like a total of 8 times or something that semester, which was, I had never missed mass before. At the end of my first year at Texas, I kind of said, like Francis, I just wanted to leave the world and get out of there. I had to leave Austin. So any parents out there thinking of big party schools for their good Catholic kids, maybe just sort of take that as a warning. But it was great for me. So I had sort of turned away. I drove home from Austin, told my mom, I need to get out of here. I need to change something. I had heard of this school, Steubenville in Ohio. I had read a few books by Dr. Scott Hahn. I had never been to the school, and I just said, I think I need to go to that Steubenville school. So, connected up there and began, ministry work in college and beyond. I met my wife there. Oh, back up real quick. I wanted to join the Franciscan friars. And so that was like sort of how I was going to go. I was going to go all in, big beard, no more money, no more honey. I am all in. And I ended up meeting a girl in sacraments class, actually, as we're discussing, upper level sacramental theology, discussing marriage and family. And she was the sweetest thing. She's studying for religious life, and she brought candy to night class. And so I just, instantly was like, hey, this is the thing. My spiritual director told me I should go on some dates. And so Kana and I went out. I think I took her to Hardee's, spent the big bucks on a milkshake. And it was there. I just knew that we could actually make this thing, a reality, that to marry somebody missional could be really cool. And so we got
with a
married
name
right
like
after.
Cana. With a name like
Cana.
Cana, you almost have to think like this is a person who is destined for the vocation of matrimony, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. Right. So, I'm a big fan of wine too, so it just sort of like that hit. It was great. Cana, Jesus's first miracle. She's a miracle in my life. It is actually pretty funny. Just as a side note, when people ask about like pre-Cana, like how you guys did pre-Cana, that's funny. It's like literally pre-Cana for me. Anyway, so yeah, we were married and coming in hot. We wanted to, we wanted to change the world. She's a convert to Catholicism from evangelical Protestantism. Her dad was a pastor. He's now a deacon in the Catholic Church. He's head of diaconate formation in the Diocese of Phoenix. Anyway, her whole family came in, and we just sort of hit the ground running with mission. And at the time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, sort of the only avenue for young evangelists or missional types would be youth ministry. And so we went straight in to youth ministry and sort of designed this stuff. Beyond that, young adults and Catholic families, et cetera. And at a certain point, as our family began to grow, we have 8 children now. We've been married, in August will be 20 years. The ministry world and our faith life in our family were kind of like on a collision course. Like I kept feeling pulled in 2 different directions because event-based programmatic ministry, right, where you have to be at the church and receive people. There's a sense of man, when my wife had to walk into mass, and kids are going to be kids, but there's that added pressure of, oh, this is the youth minister's family. And, so there were a lot of things kind of going on in our heart. God had placed on us, this responsibility, and we knew we wanted to go into mission, but the place of formal mission was kind of in conflict with the way our family, we were operating. I remember having this experience where I was traveling, and I still do travel sometimes.
Let me stop you there for 1 second, because you're drawing attention to something that parallels my own life and my own theological thinking. Mm-hmm. Like you, I grew up in a religious household, wasn't Catholic, took the language of faith for granted, came to a more personal engagement with my faith in college. And like you, transferred from a big university to a small liberal arts Christian school. In my case, it was Wheaton College. Took my girlfriend with me, right? And she became my wife. Like you, we came out, you were at Steubenville, we were at Wheaton. Those 2 schools actually have an exchange, right? Even today.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And I think they both kind of think they might poach the other. And I think Steubenville usually wins that, right? But we came out, I think we would change the world. We were going to go into missions. I mean, same story, right? Same story.
Yeah.
But like what you had that we didn't have is in the evangelical world, there is no doctrine of sacramental marriage. There's no doctrine of sacramental marriage. And the idea of vocation, I mean, that word's not really used, but the idea of vocation in the Protestant world, evangelical world, is almost entirely oriented toward outwardly towards evangelism, proselytism, mission work of some kind. And so the idea is, if I'm going to serve God in a really engaged, enthusiastic way, it almost has to be in terms of outreach to somebody outside my home. And it wasn't until I became Catholic that I realized, well, the way the Catholic Church thinks about this is the vocation, the calling on the life of married people is primarily towards one another and their children. And it's precisely in building and growing a family in grace and virtue that one is of the greatest service to one's neighbor and to the world. And so, like, I am so familiar with the conflict that you're describing, but you also had the means to address it in the sacramental life of the Catholic Church.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to run on that, because I think it does really and truly, it comes down to the sacramental life, right? So because I'm baptized, I am called to mission. I am priest, prophet, and king. When I am married and I make that covenant, right, and I make that vow with her, she is, and the Holy Spirit in that mix, sending us as a unit, right? And primarily my vocation is to her. And when things come into conflict, whether that's work or play or hobbies, anything that comes between that is going to be in the way. And I never thought that ministry was going to be one of those things that would come in the way, but it does. And in modern terms, right? I don't think that. And so we set out to find sort of a way that as a family, we could serve each other in that vocation, and also serve those around us, right? I was going to tell you just anecdotally that I remember having this experience where I was leaving my kids, and sort of like one of the buzzwords, years ago, this idea of like a fatherless generation where like there's just not dads around, and I'm flying somewhere, leaving my children to go speak to this fatherless generation, and I'm going like, wait a minute, okay, there's something awry here. What if, I don't know, are you familiar with the comedian Brian Regan? You ever heard Brian Regan?
I'm not really familiar with him.
Great comedian. He has this one joke, and I'll just tell it really quick. But he's talking about, he said, I was driving down the road the other day and I saw a log truck, and then another log truck passing that log truck. And he goes, couldn't a phone call just save a lot of time? You had logs, like why are two log trucks passing each other? And I feel like that sometimes in the church, right? Like, we go on mission, it's a big deal, and everybody gets a t-shirt, and we go on mission to Africa. And yet like African dioceses are sending us their priests, right? And so we kind of have this idea where, yes, it's good to go and experience, abroad and experience foreign mission, et cetera. But really where the church grows is in that local way. So if our assets and our resources are poured in a really intentional local way, AKA the parish, then, we sort of save on gas money, or we save in airfare, right? We can all sort of stay where we are. And, one of our patronesses, Mother Teresa, has that really famous quote, is stay where you are, find your own Calcutta. And so that was that whole thing, as we discerned that and listening to, listening to God and the saints as just as a stay here. What could we do here? How can we continue to pour into our marriage and our family while, answering the call to be the church in the world? And so that's kind of where all of this Delray Collective, Adore Ministries, Family Dinner, this is kind of where all this came out of, is this tension between family life and the call to missionary discipleship.
Okay, so now describe the ministry of Delray Collective for people who don't know about it. What is it that you do?
Yeah, so it's really, it's a collective. So we noticed years ago that, let me back up just a little bit. We're in Arizona. I was a part of Life Teen at the very grassroots level in Arizona in Mesa, and I was the youth minister at St. Timothy's there in Mesa. And we lived in a pretty cookie cutter neighborhood, suburban neighborhood, the one where nobody really looks at each other. And if you have to look at each other, you're like, you wave and then you hurry up and get into the garage and shut the door before you get out, so you don't have to engage anyone, right? Pretty typical. And we were coming home. We had this experience where we were coming home from mass, and my son on the way home is asking my wife, Kana, if we can meet our neighbors when we get home. And she's like, I don't know, let's talk to dad. So then at breakfast, he pipes up and he's like 5 years old, and he says, Dad, can we meet our neighbors? And I'm like, why? Now, at the time, I'm literally flying around the country doing missions, even abroad, and foreign missions, speaking. And my son says, we need to meet our neighbors. And I say, why? Are we like selling something? We're doing like chocolate? Or what's happening? Why do we have to meet our neighbors? And he says, my Sunday school teacher told me that Jesus said that we have to love our neighbors. And so I thought we should meet them. You talk about, you talk about conversion. You talk about like, this was one of the most profound, experiences of conversion, because all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, could Jesus have meant my neighbor?
My actual neighbor.
What? My actual neighbor? Like my neighbor? How? Wait a minute. And then, the way that we were, the way that fell into that same tension, we thought wait a minute, why am I, oh my gosh, what if God meant our neighbor? And you start doing the math on that and you go, okay, if this is genius, this is like the ultimate, sort of scheme. Jesus, this is genius. If every believing Christian disciple simply loved their neighbors, love them with the truth, love them with lots of things. I mean, not just, I love you, man, but bringing them to the heart of love, who is God. Well, shoot, man, that might work. All of this talk about what do you do with culture and how do you engage culture and how do you do all these sort of questions of, well, we need more billboards and we need more politicians and we need this and that and all these things. And all of a sudden it kind of hit me. It struck me that if we simply obeyed this command, that we could soon see a change in culture. If we could do it. So this is where.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So this is brilliant. I mean, it's fantastic. I love it. But and I know, if you go back to any building built in any residential construction in our country that's more than 100 years old, they have front porches because everybody already had an expectation they were going to know their neighbors, right?
That's right.
Now nobody builds front porches. They build decks and patios in the backyard, fence, and the garage that shuts when you walk in the door. So the whole infrastructure of our society works against what you're talking about.
That's right.
So this is a very reasonable thing your son asked, but he doesn't know what he's up against.
Right.
And you do.
Right.
And it probably put the fear of God in you to even think about, how do I go walk over to my neighbor's house and knock on his door when he's not on his front porch? And he may not want to hear from me.
No, or he's skeptical. Right? We I think that there's something to proximity, that or distance, I should say, that brings about assumptions. Right? I can look at my neighbor's yard and make assumptions about him, or I can see the political sign that he hangs up there, and make assumptions. But if I don't know my neighbor, I'm just going to continue. Those assumptions just keep building. So the amount of trust that we've lost, to your point, by not being in proximity with our neighbors, right? Now, all of a sudden, it makes it even harder. Anecdote. This is another anecdote. When we first began, for years, there were people on the other end of our block who thought that we were because we started gathering every week. Essentially, that's how it all began with our neighbors. We invited our neighbors into our home for a meal once a week. And we've done that now for.
And how did you do that? Did you did you walk over and knock on the door? Did you put something in their mailbox? What did you do?
Yeah. So we initially sent, we would send, kids are great. Right. Kids are amazing at sort of breaking down all those barriers. And so some of our older kids, we had little cards, little invites that we passed out down our block. Since then, we've heard of a number. So there's the collective. Now it's a collective. There are over 700 homes that are doing this across the country. We're beginning to update our map, and so there'll be some stuff on our website to see. But we've heard of some awesome ways to do this. So some people have front yard signs where it's just open porch this day, this time. So as people are walking by, they can see it. We've helped design door hangers, like the real estate agents do, where you hang it on the door. We've seen that, of course. Newsletters and different things like that. But really, it is sort of just a organic word of mouth. And the program is an anti-program program, and so you also don't want to make it super, professional, because then it feels like, all right, this guy has an agenda. We obviously have an agenda to love. We obviously have an agenda to bring as many people to Christ as possible. But sometimes agendas get in the way in that pre-evangelization zone. And so the word of mouth, like, hey, come on over. They're much more likely to come over for a beer and a brat than they are to a Bible study,
right?
Those that wouldn't darken a door. And so we found out very quickly that, again, to your point, that people are hungry for community, no matter what religious background they are. They're hungry for community. And so we actually live in a Jewish neighborhood with some Muslim neighbors, a lot of evangelical Protestants, and and Catholics all alike. We get together. We don't agree on a lot, but we agree that the tacos are good, and that's a good place to start. Is right there.
So this started in Arizona. It started in Arizona, but now you're doing the same thing in Texas.
Right.
In each community, I imagine they're fairly diverse gatherings, I would suspect. And did you find that if the goal is friendship, did you find that some genuine friendships emerged out of this? And how long did that take?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, friends first in the pre-evangelization zone, building trust and rapport is key. And absolutely. I mean, some of our best friends obviously are from these gatherings. It's to the point now where people just come over. There's a set time, but people are sort of walking in. This is my home. We've come home to neighbors in our backyard, just hanging out. When we're out of town, the open porch continues. We'll have neighbors that'll host for us in our backyard. So yeah, it is. It's a great place for friendship. I mean, God's always been about food, and I love food. I suspect you guys do too. But I mean, it really does. So much comes back to this. As far as the apple, right? The manna, the lamb. Of course, the feeding of the 5,000 and the Last Supper, the Eucharist. It's around a table where we build communion and community. So the food's got to be good.
Yeah,
it's got to be good food. You can't just put out a bowl of Doritos and expect people to want to come to your house next time.
Now you're doing this in your own mind. This is a stage of pre-evangelism. So at what point in your life has this translated from pre-evangelism into evangelism?
Well, and I would say it's very circular. These types of gatherings can be everything, minus the sacraments, right? So except marriage, I guess, is always present there. So, but yes, pre-evangelization, but oftentimes evangelization happens. There's, I have a friend who came around for like a year and just hanging out. We're talking about sports, we're talking about music, etc. And about a year in, he comes up to me. He's a little mad, he's a little frustrated. He goes, Ennie, he's like, I just saw you on YouTube. Like you're like a ministry guy. Like, what are you, and he goes, when are you going to tell me about Jesus?
Ha!
And I said, I guess right now, man, let's talk. He had been estranged from the church. He'd been away from the church, but his wife was asking questions. She wanted to go back to church. She wanted to bring her kids. They all came into the church. I mean, they started coming, so it happens organically, but it's not in the sort of out front sort of way. And then the on the back end, for those who are disciples, we get this amazing school. Like I always say, the family table really is the first school of evangelization, I think, simply because if you can visit and not strangle a person who is, spitting food across and going crazy and never sitting down, as far as kids go, like you can hang with anybody, right? Anybody who has a differing opinion. So these gatherings also become a school for those who are, who are already following Jesus and just don't know or have the capacity to go outside their comfort zone or outside their parish walls to evangelize. You get real life training in what do you do when somebody, and this happened one time, somebody came out like on our porch or late night, 11:30 at night, there's just a few people gathered, a young man who has been around for a long time stands up. Hey guys, I just want you to know, this is who I am. This is what's going on. What do you do? How do you do this in real time? Because we can write articles and we can do podcasts and we can talk about all the ways that we should address those who have same-sex attraction. What do you do when it's a friend right here who you love and is in your community? How do you deal with that? So I think that, for like I said, it's very circular. So there's those who are being pre-evangelization, those who are being evangelized, and those who are being sent in that way. So we've had people who have come from our neighborhood, who've moved out of our neighborhood and then begun their own open porch in their new neighborhood as well, based on this idea that, gathering people together, we can be on mission in an ordinary way. Not, it's not a stage, it's not a podcast. And I think nowadays you kind of feel like that. If you want to go into ministry, you have to have something big, a book, et cetera, et cetera. And so it can be discouraging for lay people and lay married people sometimes. Like, what do I do? I guess I got to become an usher or a catechist or something like this. When really all you need to do is open your door and God can set up those divine appointments.
So how would you encourage people who are intrigued by what you're doing, but they say, my family structure or maybe my personality is not really conducive. I mean, Ennie, he seems like a really outgoing guy. He's a public speaker. He's probably an extrovert. Maybe I'm divorced. Maybe my wife and I are having marital trouble. Maybe we got a kid who's running off the rails. Maybe we're not the life of the party kind of guy. If we invite our neighbors, maybe they'll be bored. Maybe they won't come. Maybe they'll see what a mess we are. But we'd still like to do something by way of pre-evangelism, and we're kind of inspired by the idea. What would you say to that person or that family?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of roadblocks, right? We're always going to find some sort of an excuse, and I'm not saying like, I'm not throwing everybody under the bus. There are legitimate reasons that you can't do this.
But could you adapt it? Could you kind of tone it down and do it on a smaller scale?
I do, right? Like we do, even, right? So you can imagine. I mean, we're a family of 10. We've got all sorts of problems. There's a kid vomiting, and we're about to open the door. Or we've just had a bad day, or Kane and I have been in a tiff for hours, and the last thing we want to do is invite people into that. Right. And so we come up with this, we can't do it. I have come to believe that God wants us to like lace up even before we're ready. Before we're perfect, God wants to use us in our imperfections, right? And say, no, you're fine. And as far as the, revealing it changed our life, because as you say, we're letting people into our mess. And oftentimes, as you could Google it, why are Christians so, right? It's like, righteous or self-righteous, et cetera. When people come into our home and they're like, oh, you're like really normal. Like we by this by your 12 passenger van, we thought you were, we would just be covered in statues and everything. Like, you guys are normal people. So, yeah, we have problems, and we, in our personality, actually both Kane and I are introverts. I can turn it on. I'm one of those, that can turn it on, but then I go and just like get in the fetal position when everybody leaves. There are a lot of reasons why, legitimate reasons that people can't do it. But I would just encourage anybody that if it's like, it's personality, it's this, it's that, to commit to doing something like this, even monthly, where you can gear up and you can get ready and you can vacuum and you can tidy and you can, sort of like to commit to it, is always the best way to go. If you say right now, man, I'd love to do that, we should do that, and you start looking for a date, you're never going to find a date. You ever see people you haven't seen in a while and you're like, man, we got to get together. And then you walk away and you're like, we're never getting together. Like, that's never going to happen.
So
like,
how do you think this ministry,
time.
How has this impacted your children?
Yeah. In very positive ways. They are way more open, I would say, to listening, to differing opinions. They're way more sort of adaptable to situations where you might encounter people again that aren't like you. I mean, I look at the way that Jesus walked and where he walked and who he hung out with, and it was really just everybody who wasn't like the common religious people of the time, right? And I'm not saying he didn't spend time in the temple at all, because he did there too. But when he was out and he was walking, it was always those that were like, why are you hanging out with them? My kids, in a very positive way, are able to now go and sit, I think, with the loners or those that look different or those that act different or are strange. They're way more comfortable now to engage them. They're world changers too. Like they really do, want to change the current culture.
So do you feel like
it's been very positive.
You had kind of a wake up call, sort of an insight and a transformative experience when your son put that question to you those years ago, and you had a goal in your own life of how can I stop going across the country and leaving my family to talk about good fatherhood, right? Do you feel like your present ministry, have you realized that goal? I mean, has the transformation brought you to where you want to be there?
Well, it's constantly, it's a moving target, right? As soon as we get someplace, there's more to go. It's the beauty of, entering into communion with the divine life. It's further up and further in. And so, no, I mean, we're not done at all. Like I'm a work in progress. My marriage is a work in progress. My family's a work in progress. And I would say, Delray Collective is this collective of folks who are imperfect and serving a perfect God, inviting people into relationships. So I'm very hopeful that this movement continues to grow.
While you were discussing that, a name came to me that I used to read a number of years ago, a Catholic author named James Stinson, who writes a lot on families and fatherhood and raising children. And he was a school administrator and a founder of several independent Catholic schools. And over the course of decades, he noticed that some kids just thrived and others didn't. And he wanted to figure out if there were some commonalities in those that did well. And he began to look for those points of commonality. And he kind of compiled a profile of the family that would produce these thriving, flourishing kids. I'm not going to go into the whole profile, but one of the things that he noticed was that the children of entrepreneurs tended to do better than the children of professionals. And the common denominator he felt like was, the economic change in our society over the last 80 years has tended to move parents outside the home for their jobs. Whereas for most of human history, parents would have worked in and around the home, and mostly in agriculture, honestly. And entrepreneurship, family-owned business, is one domain where that typically remains the case. The whole family will be involved in the enterprise. And so previously, parents were the ones that brought their kids to maturity. But in our culture, more and more, parents are going off someplace, and peers and television and public schools are bringing children to maturity. And it doesn't mean you have to be an entrepreneur, right? But I found that insight very fruitful to think that, hey, whatever I do in my life, whatever my job is, I have to remember that as this is physically taking me away from home, somebody other than me is raising my kids. And that dynamic is tremendously important. And so I love, you said it's a moving target, but you're clearly, your children are involved in this ministry. So your public life and the church and your private family life are sort of integrated here in a way that's been fruitful in your life and your children's lives and your neighbors' lives. And I think that's very beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I'm not, I'm never the guy that's going to like, hey, we did this thing and I'm going to pat myself on the back and eat a cookie. I'm always sort of looking for, how to elevate, how to do this better. And I would say that as our kids are becoming, teenagers, I mean, there's difficulties there. There's difficulties being even in a public space for, one day a week. For kids to, like you said, entrepreneur, it reminded me, nowadays, you would use it as like, sort of branding, like, there's a Hickman family brand that we all need to toe the line. Right. And even though dad is not saying, straighten up and you can't wear that and this, all those things, you have to look the part. I would never do that. But they get it. Like, all right, this is what we're doing. When we open the door every week, they understand, and they're great. Like they're welcoming. If they see the chip bowl is empty, they're dumping chips in. If they, somebody doesn't have, why can I get you some water? I mean, they're right on it. Hospitality as well has sort of lost its, Christian hospitality has sort of lost its meaning to the idea of maybe like Southern hospitality, where you're sort of waiting on people. But we believe that true hospitality, and this is sort of, where the table fits in. And even, are you familiar with the term, a third place? It seems like you are interested in societal, norms and things like that. Like, so post World War II, the GI Bill gave everybody a home. And so developers built living communities separate from barbershops, the market, the city square, the church, et cetera. They were just sort of, this is where you live. And then this is where you go to work and do your thing. Right. And so, prior to these living communities, these suburbs, the automobile obviously changed a lot of that. Were these places of third place, like, the piazza or the park, the benches, the pub, the common room, whatever it might be, the place where it's not work and it's not home and you can sort of stay there for as long as you need or as little as you need, but it was a place of meeting. And so, Christian hospitality from the beginning was a place where all were welcome, right? Everyone is welcome. Come as you are, and you're free to be you here, as opposed to this idea of you're coming into my home and I'm going to serve you little sandwiches on platters, right? More the idea is, hey, come in. You're welcome. You are welcome. Your person is welcome with all of your imperfections and all of your greatness. You're welcome in here. So we're trying to hearken back to that idea of the third place and true Christian hospitality.
Beautiful.
Of, recognizing the dignity in every person and their story, as opposed to, sort of prejudging them based on outward appearance or faith background.
So, Ennie, if somebody wanted to attempt what you're doing or get involved in the Delray Collective or get more information or maybe some insight and tips on how to do this better, where would they go? What would you offer them? What should they do?
Yeah, so I'm not much of a social media guy anymore, although you can find me there, or you can find us there. My name's Ennie Hickman, Ennie Hickman. That's on Facebook, Instagram, It's a unique name, so it's pretty easy to find. You can Google. Began the Open Porch, DelrayCollective.com. You can find out more there, how to start, how to register your porch.
Fantastic. Well, Ennie, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. This has been fantastic. You're welcome to come to our porch anytime that you come to the neighborhood.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Absolutely. So, if you're listening to the podcast next week, we've got a special guest, Mary Margaret Burkle, parishioner at St. Paul's Cathedral and coordinator of Dinner and a Decade, which we think is a kind of a similar, a little bit parallel idea, right? Let's have dinner and pray a decade of the rosary. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like us, recommend us to friends and neighbors. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Even play us on your front porch. So thanks again, Ennie, and those for listening to Living Catholic.
Thank you. God bless.